So for this weekend's project, I'm making a set of portable display stands as a gift for a friend of ours who makes pottery. The idea was to have something that she could easily break down for transport to craft fairs. When I saw how nicely the parts all fit together when broken down, I also decided to make a box to transport them. The box itself will also make a nice display stand. So after coming up with an initial design, I cut a few test parts. When I fit them together, they were a little looser than I wanted them to be. I also thought that maybe the text on the lower shelf was a bit bigger than it needed to be, so I went back to the design to make a few changes. So I'm back at the computer in VCarve Pro. This is the program I use to create designs for cutting on the CNC machine. The parts on the right here are the ones I cut as a test, so I can delete those. Since the test parts fit a little loosely, I've tightened up the clearances at the connection points. You'll notice at the corners here that they have a rounded cutout. That's called a dog bone fillet. It's done automatically by the computer program, so that when square parts fit together, there's room to accommodate the sharp corners even though the cutting tool has a radius to it. So at this point, we're ready to cut out our parts on the CNC machine. I'm working with 1/2-inch sheets of birch plywood that I bought at my local Home Depot. I've sanded the plywood with 220 grit sandpaper, and then I apply a water-based polyurethane to one side. Once that dries, I sand it again with 320 grit sandpaper and then wipe it down with a tack cloth. This is so I have a good smooth surface that the Aura Mask film will stick to. I use a roller to smooth out the film and make sure that it's adhering firmly to the plywood. With that done, we're ready to cut out the letters on the CNC machine. Here I'm using a 60-degree V-bit, and while the machine is cutting the letters, I follow along with a utility knife and clean up any rough edges. With the letters cut, I mix a 2-part epoxy and mix in a little bit of blue tempera paint powder to color the epoxy. I then just dump the epoxy into the carved letters and squeegee off any excess. Now you can see why I applied that Aura Mask film first. Epoxy was still tacky. I took off the Aura Mask, and I totally failed at taking a stop motion video of that. What you would have watched was me getting that little blue stuff stuck to my fingers. With the epoxy dry, the next day I put the plywood back on the CNC machine and installed a 1/4-inch compression bit. A compression bit cuts upward at the bottom of the cut and downward at the top of the cut such that you don't get any tear out on either surface. I cut out the parts in a single pass. Unfortunately, the last part broke free at the end of this cut, so I will have to cut an extra one of those when I cut the second set. I broke the parts out of the plywood sheet. At this point they were really just held in place with the sawdust packed into the cut, and I test fit things together. This time the shelf fit much more snugly. So that's it for the CNC work for now, so I'll take the parts back into the shop to round over the edges, sand, and finish. At this point I recruited my daughter Leisha to help. She would sand the edges of each part on the spindle sander, and then I would round over the edges on the router table. We made pretty quick work of that, and then Leisha sanded each part. At this point I figured out that all the parts stacked together really nicely, so I decided to make a box to hold them all to make them easy to transport to craft fairs. Of course I couldn't resist going back to the CNC machine to carve text into the box sides and cut some handles. While I was busy making the box, Leisha was painting on some water-based polyurethane. We just used some spray-on paint to highlight the letters on the box sides, and then I sanded off the excess, leaving just a little bit to go with that mystic blue theme. I used my Lee jig to cut dovetail joints for the box corners, and then a simple round over bit to round over the handles at the router table. I then used a straight bit in the router table to cut grooves for the top and bottom panels of the box. For the grooves in the side with the dovetail tails, I had to cut stopped grooves. So I dropped the part onto the bit, slide almost through to the other edge, and then lift it up to create a stopped groove. For the box top and bottom, I found an old leftover sheet of 1/4-inch plywood that was birch on one side and black on the other. To be honest, I have no idea where that came from, but it came in handy today. You can see why it's nice to have a good outfeed table on your table saw. It makes it possible to rip even 4x8 sheets of plywood when you're working on your own. I then used one of my larger crosscut sleds to cut the top and bottom panels. Alright, so we got our box all made, dovetails cut, grooves cut for the tops and bottoms. Now what I would need to do is take off about 3/4 of an inch of the top of this front so I can have a piece that slides out with the top lid. Okay, so with that strip cut out, we'll mark on the tail where we need to cut. So then I use a brush to apply glue to the edge grain of both the pins and the tails. Fit everything together. Clamp up the bottom, check for square, add some clamps running the other direction on the top, and leave it to dry. So I just cut 2 saw kerfs in a simple strip of wood, and we'll glue in that. I left a little long, I'll cut the ends to fit after the fact. Check it fits, push in the back edge. Yeah, looks good. And then temporarily hold that with some spring clamps. There. All the glue dries. Nice and simple. With the glue dry, I sanded the box, starting with 80 grit to clean out the ends of the dovetails, which were a bit proud of the box. I sanded down through 220 grit and then planed the strip of wood at the edge of the lid, flush with the box side, and cut off those protruding ends. I then filled in the ends of the groove in the lid using some small strips of wood, which I later cut flush after the glue dried. The final detail was to make a little filler block to fill the void in the box. So there you have it, enough parts to make 4 of these little corner display stands, and they break down and pack up nice and neat in this box for transport. I figure the box itself will make a nice display stand. In any case, if you enjoyed this video, as always, please click that like button and consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching.